Elara Valen never thought her last words would be shouted while running for her life, clutching a medical kit instead of a weapon, and cursing that her patients were better at dodging bullets than she was. The absurdity of it struck her even as plasma fire chewed through the dirt at her heels. She had joked earlier that morning that the only sport she was good at was triage under pressure. Now it seemed some cosmic force had taken her sarcasm literally and tossed her into a game where she was the prize. The colony had been burning since dawn. Civilians scrambled in every direction, some screaming, others too stunned to make a sound. Elara moved among them with brisk efficiency, bandaging wounds, forcing hope where there was none. She had patched up a young boy's leg, cracked jokes about giving him an extra scar to impress the girls later, and was about to check an older miner's burns when the sky darkened with silver blades of alien craft. They descended silently, shimmering like knives, and from their bellies spilled armored figures with helmets carved into cruel masks. They were tall, lean, and moved with the swagger of predators who had hunted so often that fear was their native language and they had long since grown bored of it. The Kryn. Elara had heard whispers about them from other colonies, stories that painted them as more than raiders. They weren't starving invaders or conquerors hungry for land. They were assassins who hunted not for necessity but for the exquisite delight of sport. Each raid was broadcast across shadow networks in the galaxy, wagers placed on who would survive longest, which human would scream the loudest before the end. To the Kryn, war was a joke and killing was a punchline. She pressed her patient's hand into the boy's, told him to run, and grabbed her kit. It was instinct, as natural as breathing, to go toward the chaos instead of away. She had saved men on battlefields, delivered children in crumbling shelters, stitched wounds under fire. But this time she had no squad, no husband at her side with his watchful eyes and quick blade. She was alone. The first Kryn saw her, as she ducked into an alley. He tilted his head like a cat spying a mouse and let out a sound that might have been laughter, though it came through the mask as static laced with menace. Instead of firing, he gestured to the others. 3 more emerged, their weapons glowing, their movements lazy, indulgent. They did not attack immediately. They circled, recording every moment through their visors. She realized with sick clarity that she had been chosen. Out of the hundreds screaming and scattering, they had picked her as today's sport. Medic, one of them hissed, the translation unit snapping the word in her tongue. Heal yourself? Elara forced a grin though her heart thundered. You first, she shot back, and hurled a scalpel like a knife. It clanged off armor, utterly useless, but her defiance drew another ripple of static laughter. They began the hunt. One fired a plasma bolt near her feet, making her leap like a startled animal. Another kicked over debris to herd her into the open. Every second was dragged out, exaggerated for their entertainment. She tripped, scrambled up, sprinted again. Her lungs burned, her legs begged her to stop, but she refused. Rage flickered through her exhaustion. They wanted her broken, terrified, begging for mercy. She would give them none of it. She ducked into a warehouse, weaving between shattered crates. For a moment she thought she had lost them, until a hiss of plasma lit the darkness and carved a hole through a wall. She spun, saw the glow of their eyes through the shadows. They were closing in, relishing the chase. She grabbed a length of pipe from the ground, held it like a staff. Ridiculous, but it steadied her shaking hands. Come on then, she said, voice hoarse. I've stitched worse monsters than you. They rushed her together. She swung, caught one across the helmet, but another caught her arm and twisted. Pain shot white-hot through her body. The pipe fell. A third drove a blade across her side, shallow but bleeding, meant to weaken and not kill. She refused to scream. She spat blood and laughter at them. The leader raised his weapon and leveled it at her chest. He didn't shoot immediately. He drew the moment out, savoring her defiance. She thought of Kale then, of his steady eyes and the way he always kissed her knuckles after a long shift. She thought of the promise he once made, that no harm would ever touch her so long as he breathed. She smiled, even as her vision blurred, because she knew this was the one promise he would never forgive himself for breaking. The plasma bolt tore through her, and she collapsed. The Kryn stood over her corpse in silence, then broke into that hideous laughter again. They replayed the footage among themselves, sharing the moment, mocking her bravery as if it were a punchline in a comedy show. One bent down and plucked her scalpel from the floor, twirling it before tossing it aside like a toy. When they left, the warehouse was filled only with smoke, her blood, and the faint echo of laughter that would haunt the walls forever. Far away, Cale Valen received the news not from an official channel, but through a smuggled data packet that contained the broadcast. He watched the footage in the dark, every muscle in his body locked rigid. He saw her run, saw her fight, saw her stand taller than any warrior with nothing but a pipe in her hands. And then he saw her die for sport, her courage cheapened into entertainment. The world went silent around him. His breath stopped, his pulse slowed, as though his body could not decide whether to live or die. He played the footage again, then again, memorizing every frame. Finally, he closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something colder and sharper had taken their place. "They chose the wrong woman," he whispered. And in that whisper was the promise of a storm that would tear the hunters from their throne of laughter and drown them in silence forever. Cale Valen sat in the dark with the recording still playing on a loop, though the sound had long been muted. He had watched Alara die 100 times in silence, her laugh, her fight, her final smile before the bolt ended her life. Every second etched itself into his bones like fire carving stone. He had spent years burying the man he used to be, the one who lived by blade and bullet, and Alara had been the reason he kept that darkness chained. But the chains were gone now, shattered the moment her body hit the ground. Grief sat heavy in his chest, sharp and suffocating, but beneath it simmered something more dangerous. It was resolve dressed in rage, and it waited coiled and patient. The walls of the outpost around him felt suffocating. He could almost hear her voice chiding him to stand up straight, to eat something, to shave before he started looking like a drifter. He remembered how she always smiled when she teased him, how she never flinched at the scars he carried both inside and out. He laughed once, hollow and bitter, because she had once said that she could stitch together even his broken soul. Now the woman who mended others was gone, and Cale was left with ragged seams. He pulled open a metal trunk that had lain untouched for years beneath the floor panels. Inside, wrapped in cloth and oil, were weapons he swore he would never touch again. A collapsible rifle, a pair of plasma pistols, blades balanced for throwing, and at the very bottom a small vial containing data chips with names, codes, and debts that spanned half the galaxy. These were relics from a past he had locked away for her sake. His hands trembled as he touched them, not with fear, but with the certainty that once he began down this path, he could never return. He assembled the rifle with motions that came back like muscle memory, every click and snap punctuating his grief with clarity. The weapon felt almost too natural in his hands, as though it had been waiting for him all this time. He checked power cells, adjusted the scope, and slid the blade harness over his shoulder. He caught his reflection in the dusty glass of a wall panel. The man staring back at him was not the weary husband who had built a quiet life. It was the ghost of a soldier Alara had tried to lay to rest. As he prepared, the thought struck him that he could not do this alone. The Kryn were not pirates hiding in shadows. They were a network, armed with resources and influence. Hunting them would require more than vengeance and stubbornness. It would require allies. He hated the idea because trusting others always came with betrayal, but Alara had trusted everyone she met until the end. That memory forced him to send coded messages across old channels, each one like prying open a door that should have stayed locked. The first to answer was Jax. Cale found him where he expected, drunk on winnings at a dingy gambling den orbiting a mining station. Jax had the kind of face that looked permanently hungover, with one mechanical eye that glowed faintly when he lied, which was almost always. He grinned when he saw Cale, a grin that suggested both nostalgia and trouble. "Well, well. I thought you swore off ghosts," Jax said, swirling his glass. Cale's silence was answer enough. The grin faded. Jax scratched his beard and leaned back. "If you're calling me, it means something went to hell. I'll bite. What's the job?" "They killed Alara," Cale said flatly. Jax blinked once, his smile gone. He tried to cover his reaction with a scoff, but his mechanical eye betrayed the tremor of guilt he felt even at the mention of her name. Everyone owed Alara something. She had patched wounds, pulled lives back from the brink, saved fools like Jax more times than they deserved. "You know I'm in," Jax muttered. "She saved my life twice, and not once did she complain about my smell. That's worth more than credits." The second ally was harder to convince. Lyra had been a sniper in Cale's old unit, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. He found her on a cold moon, teaching children how to shoot rusted cans off fences. She did not smile when she saw him. She didn't even stand. "You're late," she said, as though she had been expecting him. "I wasn't planning to come," Cale admitted. "And yet here you are, dragging me back into blood and ghosts." She studied him with the cold patience of a predator. "This is about her, isn't it?" He nodded. She sighed, almost annoyed, but there was a flicker in her eyes that betrayed her. Alara had stitched her shoulder once after a mission gone wrong, humming off-key to distract from the pain. Lyra had never forgotten. She might insult Cale every chance she got, but she respected Alara in a way she never respected him. That was enough. With Jax and Lyra reluctantly in tow, Cale began to piece together the path forward. Jax hacked into shadow networks, tracing the Kryn's broadcasts, while Lyra scouted contacts who whispered of the next hunting grounds. Each discovery was laced with frustration, because the Kryn operated like entertainers, their hunts scheduled, broadcast, and sold as though human lives were no more than tickets to a show. The galaxy did not stop them because too many profited from their cruelty. Cale listened, planned, and sharpened his resolve. His companions joked and argued, their banter sharp enough to cut the tension, but every laugh reminded him of Alara's own humor, and every argument reminded him that these were not her shoulders to lean on. He pushed them, demanded precision, and though they grumbled, they followed. They knew better than to mistake his grief for weakness. One night, while Jax and Lyra argued over a map projection, Cale sat alone with Alara's scalpel. He turned it in his hands, remembering how she once wielded it with such calm, saving lives with quiet grace. He could still hear her teasing him that she could do more damage with a scalpel than he could with a rifle. Now it was the only piece of her he carried. He swore silently that it would one day taste the blood of her killers. By the time the leads pointed to the Kryn's next hunt, Cale was ready. His ship was refitted, weapons stocked, allies assembled. Yet beneath the fury, there was still the echo of her laughter, still the warmth of her smile. He clung to it because he knew once the hunt began, there would be no turning back. The man she had loved was already fading, replaced by a shadow sharpened by grief. And the Kryn, in their arrogance, had handed that shadow a reason to rise. Cale Valen stepped aboard his ship, eyes fixed on the stars. Somewhere out there, the Kryn laughed. Soon enough, they would choke on it. The asteroid did not look like much from a distance. It spun lazily in the void, jagged and gray, just another rock among millions. But as Cale's ship drifted closer, its secrets revealed themselves. Lights glimmered faintly across the surface, hidden ports flickered open and closed, and the scars of artificial structures cut across the stone. The Kryn had turned this asteroid into an arena, a place where death was not only staged but celebrated. From its hollowed belly came transmissions and signals, bouncing across the galaxy, advertising the next round of hunts to anyone twisted enough to place a wager. To Cale, it was less a hunting ground and more a carnival of cruelty, and every pulse of light only deepened the burn in his chest. Jax leaned over the console, chewing a stimstick as his mechanical eye flickered with streams of data. He whistled low. "Well, they've got quite the setup. Broadcast relays, betting pools, even premium channels for slow-motion replays. The whole galaxy tunes in for this garbage." He glanced at Cale, hesitating. "Your wife's recording is still archived here. People are still watching it." Cale's hands tightened on the armrest, but his voice was steady. "Then we erase it. After we burn this place down." Lyra studied the asteroid through the viewport, her sniper's eye picking out every vantage point, every blind spot. You can't just burn it down. Not yet. If you go in guns blazing, we'll be dead before we hit the ground. You need to think like them. Hunt the hunters. Slip into their little circus, make them laugh before you tear out their throats. Cale's jaw clenched. He had never been one for masks and games, but she was right. Charging in would be suicide. He would have to walk into their house, pretend to be one of them, and wait for the perfect moment. The thought twisted his gut, but he forced himself to nod. Jax grinned, almost relieved. Good news, I've already got us passes. We're official off-world gamblers now. Registered, encoded, the whole bit. All we have to do is walk in, bet on some bloodshed, and keep a straight face. The disguise was barely more than cheap theatrics. Cloaks dyed in garish alien colors, breathing masks that distorted their voices, and a string of codes tied to a stolen account fat with credits. Cale hated every moment of it. He was a soldier, not a gambler, and playing the part made his skin crawl. But as they docked with the asteroid and passed through the airlocks into its hollowed core, he forced the mask into place. Inside was chaos disguised as spectacle. Vast chambers carved into the rock pulsed with neon lights and holograms. Alien species from every corner of space filled the stands, shouting, laughing, waving betting slips. Screens floated in the air, replaying highlights of past hunts, men and women screaming, running, dying. Vendors sold drinks and food, as though this were nothing more than a festival. The air reeked of smoke and chemicals, and beneath it all lay the sharp tang of blood. Cale's stomach turned when Alara's face flashed briefly across the screen, her final stand replayed as part of a montage. Lyra's hand shot out, gripping his arm, her voice low. Not now. Not here. You'll get your moment. They followed Jax through the crowd, weaving between gamblers and mercenaries, until they reached a balcony overlooking the main arena. Below, a new hunt was beginning. Humans were driven into the field, half-starved colonists stripped of dignity, and handed crude weapons. Kryn assassins stalked them from the shadows, their movements broadcast to the roaring crowd. Bets were shouted, credits exchanged, and laughter rolled like thunder as the first plasma shot turned a man into ash. Jax leaned against the railing, smirking too widely. See? You blend in. Just pretend you're enjoying it. Cale didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the assassins, watching every step, every habit. They were arrogant, too confident in their game. They drew out the kills, showing off for the crowd, never imagining someone might turn the field against them. Cale filed away every weakness. When the hunt ended and the bodies were dragged away, Jax tugged them toward a back corridor. Showtime. I've got a way into their systems. If I can hack the betting relays, we can piggyback on their signals, maybe get intel on where the next hunt is staged. The corridor was narrow and dim, lit only by the occasional flicker of dying lights. It smelled of oil and burnt metal, the guts of the arena hidden from the audience's eyes. Jax knelt by a panel, prying it open with practiced ease, his mechanical eye glowing as he worked. Lyra stood watch, rifle slung casually but ready. Cale paced like a caged animal, every step echoing in the silence. Minutes stretched before Jax cursed under his breath. They've got firewalls stacked like fortress walls. Give me time. Time was the one thing they did not have. A sound echoed down the corridor, metallic footsteps, steady and deliberate. Cale froze, hand on his weapon. 3 Kryn assassins appeared at the far end, their masks glinting in the dim light. They stared for a long moment before one spoke. You are not gamblers, the voice hissed, full of static. You are prey pretending to be predators. Lyra lifted her rifle before the last syllable faded. A single shot cracked, dropping the first assassin with a hole in his visor. The corridor erupted into chaos. Plasma fire lit the walls, sparks showered from ruptured pipes, and Cale moved like a man possessed. He ducked low, charged forward, and drove his blade into the nearest assassin's gut, twisting until the alien howled. He used the body as a shield, taking the brunt of the plasma before shoving it aside and finishing the last with a shot that cracked through the corridor like thunder. Silence fell, broken only by Jax's muttering as he yanked a final wire free. Got it. Their next hunt location, schedules, even access codes. We're in. Cale wiped the blood from his blade and stared down at the corpses. The Kryn had chosen to laugh at his wife's death. Now he would turn their own game against them. He felt no satisfaction in the kill, only a colder purpose settling deeper in his bones. They dragged the bodies into a maintenance hatch and cleaned what evidence they could before slipping back into the chaos of the arena. The crowd still roared above, oblivious to what had just unfolded beneath their feet. Cale's gaze drifted once more to the massive screens. He no longer saw Alara's death as a moment of despair. He saw it as a starting gun. The Kryn had turned her into a spectacle. Now he would use their spectacle against them. He would twist their rules, poison their game, and make the hunters feel the terror they so loved to cause. The arena thundered with another round of laughter, but this time Cale allowed himself the faintest of smiles. Let them laugh. Soon enough, the laughter would end. Cale had spent years learning how to wait, how to measure every step of a battlefield before striking, but on the Kryn's arena world there was no patience left in him. The information Jax had stolen from their systems revealed hunting cycles, patrol routes, and weapons caches. The assassins were arrogant enough to leave their tools lying about like trophies. To Cale, every careless detail was an opportunity. He did not plan to simply kill them. He planned to break them. The first night he struck, he moved like a ghost through a maintenance shaft, slipping into a chamber where 4 assassins drank and laughed over footage of their last hunt. He listened for a moment as they replayed the kill, mocking the way a man had begged for his children. Then Cale shut the door behind him, dropped the lights, and let silence fall. When the lights flickered back on, 3 assassins lay dead, and the 4th stumbled screaming through the corridors with his own severed arm clutched in his other hand. Cale let him run, because fear was more valuable than death. By morning, the story of the shadow who killed for vengeance spread like wildfire among the hunters. They began to glance over their shoulders, breaking the easy swagger they once carried. Cale found no joy in their fear, but he used it like a blade. Jax, however, was less thrilled. He kept fidgeting with his gear, muttering curses under his breath. "You're getting sloppy," he complained one night as they regrouped in a hidden alcove carved into the rock. "Leaving survivors, letting bodies get found, it's only a matter of time before they trace us. And when they do, I promise you, it won't be some drunken patrol. They'll send someone you don't want to meet." "They need to know," Cale replied coldly. "They need to feel hunted. If they sleep without fear, I haven't done enough." Lyra watched the exchange, cleaning her rifle with methodical precision. "He's right about one thing, Cale. You're enjoying this too much." Cale's head snapped toward her. "Enjoying it? My wife was slaughtered for their amusement. This isn't enjoyment. This is justice." But even as he said it, he heard the hollowness in his own words. Each strike left him colder, not satisfied. Each death made Alara feel further away, not closer. He had stopped counting how many Kryn had fallen to his traps, his blade, his fury. Yet still the image of her death burned fresh every time he closed his eyes. It was during one of these ambushes that the cracks began to show in his allies. Jax had slipped away to slice into a betting pool terminal, claiming it was to siphon credits for bribes and weapons. But Cale noticed how Jax's pockets grew heavier with each return. When he confronted him, Jax laughed it off. "Old habits, you know? A man's gotta eat." But Cale knew it was more. Jax was feeding information to someone, though he couldn't prove it yet. Lyra's doubts were quieter but sharper. She watched Cale as though weighing whether he was still the man she had once followed. One night, after they had dragged another assassin's body into the shadows, she whispered, "Alara would have hated this. She healed Cale. She saved lives. If she saw what you're becoming, she'd—" She trailed off, unwilling to finish. Cale's grip tightened on his blade until the handle creaked. "She's dead because of them. If I become a monster to stop monsters, so be it." The turning point came when Cale staged a spectacle of his own. Using Jax's stolen codes, they lured a squad of assassins into one of the arena's trap chambers, where walls shifted and weapons were hidden in plain sight. But instead of simply killing them, Kale turned the chamber into a twisted reflection of their own games. He broadcast it live onto their network, forcing every hunter to watch as their comrades stumbled into their own devices, poisoned by their own gas, shredded by their own blades. Kale stood in the center, his face visible, his voice a low growl as he told them the names of every human the assassins had murdered. He forced them to look at their cruelty, mirrored back in blood. When the feed ended, silence spread across the arena. The hunters were no longer laughing. They were enraged. To them, Kale was no longer prey. He was a predator who had mocked them on their stage, turned their own sport against them. And the Kryn did not forgive humiliation. The response came swift. Patrols doubled, alarms whispered through the halls, and bounty notices spread like wildfire. The assassins stopped playing with their victims and began executing them quickly, anger stripping away their usual theatrics. Kale's actions had unsettled their traditions, and for a culture built on spectacle, there was no greater crime. That was when Kale first heard the name XYR. Jax brought the news, his eye twitching nervously as he explained. They're sending in their champion. The one who's never lost a hunt. They say he doesn't just kill, he dismantles, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but a memory of pain. He's the nightmare they whisper about when they're drunk. If they're sending him, it means you've done it. You've pissed them off more than anyone ever has. Lyra's expression hardened. And that means they won't stop until either you're dead or he is. Kale said nothing for a long time. He stared at the scalpel Alara had once used, still stained from the last kill he had made with it. He had thought vengeance would bring him closer to her, but all it had done was drag him deeper into the abyss. Yet there was no turning back now. If XYR was coming, then the only path left was forward. That night, Kale sat alone in the dark, the sounds of alien laughter faintly echoing from the upper levels of the arena. He remembered the way Alara had laughed, bright and human, the kind of sound that filled a room with warmth. The two sounds clashed in his head, one a reminder of everything he had lost, the other a reminder of everything he would destroy. The Kryn thought they were sending their champion to silence him. They did not realize they had already created something worse. Kale Valen was no longer a man chasing vengeance. He was a storm, and storms did not stop until everything in their path was broken. The night XYR arrived, the entire asteroid seemed to hold its breath. Kale felt it in the walls, in the sudden hush of gamblers who normally roared at every kill, in the way the Kryn patrols walked straighter and spoke softer. Their champion had come, and even the predators bowed their heads when he passed. Kale caught his first glimpse of him on a broadcast feed that rippled across every screen. XYR stood taller than the others, his armor marked with scars of 100 hunts, each one etched like a medal. His helmet bore no grotesque grin like the others. It was a blank, expressionless mask, and somehow that was worse. The crowd cheered his arrival, but Kale noticed how many of the assassins did not cheer at all. They watched in silence, the way soldiers watch a weapon that could as easily cut them as their enemies. Jax fidgeted nervously as he stared at the feed. That's him. That's the executioner of executioners. You've stirred up a hornet nest, Kale, and they've brought the biggest hornet they've got. We need to run before he finds us. Kale ignored him, eyes locked on the screen. XYR did not strut or posture. He moved with quiet purpose, and when he spoke to the gathered assassins, his voice was calm, steady, measured. The game has been corrupted, he said, his words broadcast across every corner of the arena. A prey who thinks himself a predator mocks our way. This cannot stand. I will correct the balance. The arena erupted in cheers, but Kale only felt the cold certainty that this was the fight he had been walking towards since Alara's death. They found him sooner than Kale expected. One moment he and his allies were moving through a forgotten corridor, preparing another strike against the broadcast towers, and the next the lights died, the air filled with silence, and XYR stepped into the path ahead. He was taller in person, his presence like a shadow swallowing the hall. He did not rush them. He simply stood, watching, as though weighing whether they were even worth the effort. Jax panicked first. He raised his pistol and fired wildly. The bolts sizzled harmlessly off XYRR's armor. The champion moved with frightening speed, closing the distance, and striking Jax so hard he slammed into the wall and crumpled. Kale lunged forward, rifle raised, firing controlled bursts. XYRR dodged with inhuman precision, his blade flashing as it sliced the rifle clean in half. Kale barely had time to roll away before the weapons remained sparked in his hands. Lyra dropped to one knee, lining her shot, and fired at the gaps in XYRR's armor. One shot glanced across his side, drawing a hiss of smoke, but XYRR turned with such speed she barely rolled out of the way of his counter. His blade buried itself in the wall where her head had been. She cursed, firing again, forcing him back a step. Kale seized the moment, lunging with one of his throwing knives, but XYRR caught his wrist mid-swing. Their eyes met through the mask, and Kale saw nothing there. No anger, no joy, no cruelty. Just an emptiness that terrified him more than laughter ever could. XYRR twisted, sending Kale sprawling, his knife clattering across the floor. The fight became chaos. Jax stumbled up, coughing blood, and Kale finally saw the truth. Jax's hand moved to his comm, transmitting faint signals, and Kale understood. Jax had been leaking their movements all along, gambling with their lives to pay off debts. XYRR had found them because Jax had delivered them. The betrayal lit a fire in Kale's chest hotter than any wound. He surged up, ripping a blade from his belt, and without hesitation drove it into Jax's side. The man's eyes widened in shock, a garbled protest spilling from his lips, but Kale twisted the blade all the same. Lyra watched with wide eyes, her rifle lowering, but she said nothing. She only spat on Jax's body when it slumped, her disgust plain. XYRR watched all of it without moving, as though testing them, measuring the weight of their loyalty and their hate. Then he stepped forward, and the duel truly began. Kale faced him with nothing but a blade and his fury. XYRR's movements were precise, efficient, every strike meant to end a life in one blow. Kale countered with desperation and cunning, using the narrow corridor to his advantage. He ducked low, feigned stumbles, forced XYRR into positions where his size worked against him. Lyra provided cover, her shots grazing his armor, buying Kale seconds at a time. At one point XYRR's blade slashed across Kale's arm, burning through flesh and muscle. Pain blinded him, but he bit it back and used the momentum to slam his elbow into XYRR's visor. The mask cracked, a thin fracture running across its surface. For the first time, Kale thought he saw a flicker of emotion behind that blank mask, a recognition, perhaps, or the faintest respect. The fight stretched on, a brutal dance of blade against blade, flesh against steel. Kale was bleeding from half a dozen wounds, his body screaming with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. He remembered Alara's smile, the way she had always told him he was more than just a weapon. Now he would use that memory as the weapon they never saw coming. XYRR finally drove him against the wall, blade raised for the final strike. Kale's hand fumbled at his belt and closed on the one weapon that mattered most. Alara's scalpel. Small, insignificant, overlooked. He drew it and slashed upward, burying it into the gap in XYRR's armor beneath the chin of his helmet. The champion staggered, his blade dropping from his hand, a spray of dark blood spilling across the floor. Kale held on, twisting the scalpel deeper, his voice a whisper. "This is for her." XYRR collapsed, his massive body hitting the ground with a sound that shook the corridor. Silence followed, broken only by Kale's ragged breathing. He stood trembling, covered in blood, Alara's scalpel still clenched in his fist. The crowd above, watching through hidden feeds, erupted into chaos. Their champion, their god of the hunt, had fallen. But victory brought no peace. In the aftermath, Jax's betrayal became clear. He had not only led them here but had been broadcasting to the betting pools, turning Kale's vengeance into the newest spectacle. The galaxy had watched the duel as eagerly as they had watched Alara's death. Billions had placed wagers, cheering, laughing, gasping, as Kale fought for his life. The realization struck him harder than any blade. He had avenged Alara, but he had also become part of the very game he despised. Her death had not ended as tragedy but as entertainment, and his vengeance had become the sequel. Cale's grip tightened around the scalpel until his knuckles bled. He knew then that killing XYRR was only the beginning. It was not enough to destroy a champion. He had to tear down the entire arena, burn their spectacle until there was nothing left but silence. Only then could Alara truly rest. The death of XYRR did not silence the arena. It ignited it. Across the asteroid the roar of voices swelled, some in outrage, others in awe, and most in the fevered excitement of gamblers who had just witnessed the greatest upset in their bloody history. Bets changed hands, fortunes were made and lost, and the Kryn themselves stood in stunned silence, unaccustomed to seeing their god of the hunt fall. Cale stood over the champion's body, trembling, Alara's scalpel still buried in his hand. He had won, but the taste of victory was ash. Screens above flickered with replays, angles from hidden cameras capturing every strike and counter, his wife's murderous culture turning his most painful moment into another broadcast. The realization hit like a hammer. The galaxy was not mourning with him. They were cheering. Lyra touched his shoulder, her face pale but steady. "It isn't over. They'll make you the star of their next season if you let them." Her words drove home the truth. The Kryn had taken Alara's life, but the greater crime was what they had done with it, turning her bravery into a commodity, selling her last breath for credits and laughter. Killing XYRR meant nothing if the system endured. Cale's vengeance had to become more than blood. It had to become a reckoning. They fled into the deeper guts of the asteroid, carrying only what they could. Jax's betrayal had left them exposed, and with his death their codes and clearances were no longer enough. Patrols scoured the halls, alarms wailed, and Cale could feel the weight of every eye on them. But instead of running for safety, he pushed deeper toward the heart of the arena, the broadcasting hub that powered the hunts. The hub was a cathedral of wires and screens, a vast chamber where hundreds of feeds converged, spitting out images of death to every corner of the galaxy. Technicians scurried like insects beneath massive towers of equipment, their attention consumed by the chaos of XYRR's fall. None noticed Cale until it was too late. He and Lyra cut through them with brutal precision, blades and bullets silencing those who reached for alarms. By the time the last technician fell, the chamber was theirs. Cale stared at the controls, his reflection broken across dozens of screens. Every hunt, every scream, every final moment of a victim had passed through this room. This was where Alara's death had been packaged and sold. He felt his rage harden into clarity. He would not just kill the assassins. He would erase their legacy. He turned to Lyra. "Get me on the feed." Lyra hesitated. "You'll be showing your face to the entire galaxy. Every government, every mercenary, every assassin will know your name." "They already do," Cale said. "But they don't know the truth." With quick hands she set the controls. The screens flickered, feeds across the galaxy interrupted as Cale's face filled the broadcasts that had once shown death. Billions of viewers expecting another spectacle of blood now saw the husband of the woman who had died for their amusement. Cale's voice carried across every world, steady and cold. "You have watched them hunt. You have laughed. You have bet credits on human lives. You watched my wife, Alara Valen, die for sport. And now you cheer for me because I killed their champion. But you are not spectators. You are accomplices. Every credit you spend, every laugh you share keeps their blades sharp. I am done being their prey. From this day, their game is over. I will burn it all." His words ended, and before the feed could be cut, he moved to the central console and overloaded the core. Warnings screamed across the chamber as systems strained against the surge. The screens flashed red, sparks rained from the towers, and the technicians' work of decades began to unravel in seconds. Across the galaxy the broadcasts went dark, the endless stream of blood silenced by fire. But the destruction drew the Kryn like vultures. Dozens poured into the hub, weapons raised, masks gleaming. Lyra dropped two before Cale even looked up, but the tide was overwhelming. They fought like cornered animals, every strike fueled by desperation. Cale slashed with Alara's scalpel, carving through armor as if it were fate itself guiding his hand. He moved with the fury of a man who had already accepted death, his only purpose to take as many as possible with him. When the numbers became too many, Cale reached for the final measure. From his pack he pulled the charges they had carried for weeks, shaped explosives strong enough to tear the asteroid apart. He slapped them onto the core, setting the timers with steady hands. Lyra's eyes widened, but she did not argue. She simply gave a grim nod. They fought their way back through the corridors as the timers ticked down. Every hall shook with the beginning of the end, walls cracking, lights failing. Alarms wailed across the asteroid, and for the first time the Kryn themselves screamed in fear. The arena, their throne of laughter, was collapsing around them. At the docking bay, their stolen ship waited, engines primed. Lyra covered Cale as he stumbled aboard, blood trailing from half a dozen wounds. The asteroid convulsed as the charges blew, fire ripping through its veins. Cale collapsed into the pilot's seat, forcing the ship free just as the entire arena erupted into a sphere of light and debris. Behind them, the Kryn's empire of spectacle died in silence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The stars stretched endless ahead, cold and empty. Cale sat with Alara's scalpel in his hand, stained and worn. He placed it gently on the console, his voice low, almost a prayer. "It's done, Alara. They'll never laugh at you again." When they reached the colony where she had been buried, Cale walked alone to her grave. He set the scalpel in the earth, pressing it down until it stood like a marker beside her name. His hands lingered on the soil, his shoulders heavy with everything unsaid. "I couldn't protect you," he whispered. "But I can make sure no one suffers like you did. I can carry what you stood for. Not the killing. The saving." He stood for a long moment, the wind cold against his face, before finally turning away. Lyra waited at the edge of the field, her rifle slung over her back. She did not speak. She only nodded, as though she understood what words could not carry. Cale left the grave behind, not with peace but with purpose. The Kryn were wounded, but not gone. Their network stretched deeper than one asteroid, their cruelty rooted in places yet unseen. He would find them. He would silence them all. But he would not only be a weapon. For Alara's sake, he would be more. Months later, in the smoky depths of a bar on a forgotten world, a survivor of the hunts whispered to a crowd of smugglers and soldiers. "The hunters made him," the man said, eyes wide with fear. "They thought they were gods. But now they've made something worse. They've made the thing that hunts them." And in the shadows of the galaxy, Cale Valen vanished once more, leaving behind only the echo of his vow and the silence of laughter that would never return.